All right, so we're going to talk about Martin Heidegger. Now in this class we're doing pretty much Heidegger 101, really get down to the core basics where you can understand Heidegger. And I'll read a short paper that is in the Heidegger Reader here. It's the opening essay by Heidegger in this collection by Gunter Fiegel, which is an excellent collection because it supplements, it's careful not to overlap with the basic writings. So you won't find any of the basic writings that's in that collection in this collection. They're meant to supplement each other. Fiegel was very smart about how he edited this together. Lots of great stuff in here. But we'll start with the opening paper in there that I'm going to read in a minute. I'm going to say a few words about Heidegger, though. Now, so he was born in Meschkirch, 1889, and died at the age of 86 in 1976. And so I find it interesting, this geographical area here around Lake Constance and the Black Forest, Munich, and in Heidegger's case, Meschkirch. All these places are within a 200-mile radius of each other. All of these great German thinkers. Jung was on the other side of Lake Constance from Heidegger at Meschkirch. Heidegger, Rudolf Steiner, Jean Gebser, they're all pretty much born right around the same time period, 1870s and 1880s, and within roughly a 200-mile radius of each other. That includes Rilke also, possibly Ernst Bloch as well. So a group of people from the beyond, the astral plane, whatever you want to call it, all chose to incarnate in an area next to each other to try and solve the same task, but with totally different ideas, namely Spengler too. Munich was his haunt, to try and solve the problem of the decline of the West. What's going on here? The West is disintegrating. Its transcendental signifieds are disintegrating. And once that happens on the metaphysical plane, then it codes for a war on the physical plane. Wars are not random. They are not fought over economics. They're fought over ideas, metaphysical ideas that spill out from the metaphysical plane and manifest on the physical plane, as Rudolf Steiner well knew. Okay, so that's sort of the group that he comes out of. And his mentor is, now it takes him a long time. He's a Catholic. This is in the south in Germany, closer to the Bavarian Catholic German world, and he remains Catholic for quite a long time. He's thought of as a Catholic philosopher by his peers, and in Freiburg when he goes there, because Edmund Husserl is there, and he wants to study under Edmund Husserl, it takes about a year for him to get Husserl to warm up to him, I think in 1913, 1911, 12, 13, right in there. Because Husserl is thinking of him, he's a Catholic philosopher. What am I supposed to do with that? There's going to be a bunch of dogma in the way. And that's the problem with Catholicism, with all of its dogma. What dogma does is it prevents thinking. It creates a wall in your psyche, your intellect, whatever you want to call it, that does not allow new ideas in. Only old, dusty, worn-out ideas that are totally useless in the application to modernity, to the situation that we're in now. The situation we're in now, globally speaking, especially the Euro-American civilization, has outgrown Christianity. It's a useless religion. It has nothing to, it just does not pertain to the circumstances and the events that are going on with us on the planet right now. So let's toss that aside. So we've got these various German thinkers all having very interesting ways of responding philosophically to the problem of the collapse of the West. And Heidegger's way is a different way. So Husserl is, their relationship is kind of like Freud's relationship with Jung. Very similar kind of father-son projections that each is making on each other. Husserl had one of his sons killed in the war, and at the time that he's talking to Heidegger in 1913, he's got another son in the hospital with a bullet in his head. So Husserl starts sort of warming up to him in a paternal, fatherly way. Husserl was very, very certain of himself. He comes in at the tail end of what Heidegger later will call the metaphysical age, and which Derrida will call the logocentric age, from Plato all the way down to Husserl. Because in a way, there's some radically new ideas with Husserl, but there's also a lot of old baggage, worn out ideas, such as the transcendental ego that exists in this abstract, de-worlded phase space And this is what Heidegger is going to critique in this lecture that I'm going to read a couple pages from in a moment, which is ground zero for understanding Heidegger. So Husserl has this idea that with phenomenology, which he did not completely invent because Franz Brentano was Husserl's teacher, and it really starts with Brentano, but Husserl really is its Moses figure. He puts it all together and sends it off and running out into the world with Gadamer and Jaspers and company. So the idea of phenomenology for Husserl, and he has two books that are essential for understanding him. The one book is published in 1900, Logical Investigations. Then 13 years later, he publishes the book called The Ideas, which are the two central masterworks for understanding Husserl's idea of phenomenology. So phenomenology is the study of consciousness, because whenever we say the word consciousness, what we really always mean is consciousness of something. There is no consciousness that exists independently of the world. And the world for Husserl is really there in an essential sense. He really does have sort of almost Platonic forms incarnate in the physical world, because he believes that outer phenomena are actually there in an essential way, in terms of essences. But how we receive them, how we perceive their actuality, differs from person to person. It differs from species to species. All these different kinds of consciousnesses, and he calls them intentions, because consciousness always intends something. Let's say I'm conscious of that tree over there. I'm looking at the tree. Now, he would call the perceived object the noema. He's using these Greek terms for thing, the noema. And the process of perceiving the thing he calls noesis. So that's the process. Now, let's say I'm perceiving this tree over there. Now, my noetic state of perception can change. Maybe the tree bores me. Maybe the tree is unbelievably beautiful and I want to paint it. Maybe the tree has beautiful fruit on it that I want to eat. Maybe the tree is really scary looking, like something out of a Tim Burton movie or something. All of those noetic states are different forms of intentionality, different forms of perception, different forms of consciousness. So each one has a different noetic state that has a structure to it and can be analyzed. As Heidegger, for instance, later will give a whole lecture cycle on boredom. And this may have influenced a bit Heidegger's idea that philosophy begins not with concepts but with moods. Like Being in Time begins with anxiety as the central mood. And the series on that he writes on, or actually it's a series of lectures that he gave on boredom, which is called The Fundamental Concepts of Metaphysics, World, Finitude, Solitude. One of his best lecture cycles, absolutely. There's nothing boring about it. It's amazing that he can take a mood, Stimmung in German, a mood, and analyze it. But that's the inheritance, phenomenologically speaking, from Husserl, where Husserl is analyzing these different states of consciousness, and he wants to build solid foundations for the sciences. He doesn't believe that philosophy is just a parlor game or a random thing or a personality like Nietzsche explosively expressing himself. He's a systematizer. He's an architect of ideas, kind of like Kant in that respect. And he's building up a foundation for what he believes will be philosophy as a science. Philosophy as the basis for all the other sciences. They will all have to defer to it. This is sort of the response to what was happening to philosophy as the sciences were advancing in the latter part of the 19th century, well, all through the 19th century, shoving philosophy and its airy metaphysics out of the way. And so philosophy, like with Kierkegaard, becomes more about emotions and moods and the concept of dread, anxiety, which has an influence now on Heidegger, and we'll see how it manifests in a moment. So we've got this abstract phase space. Whenever we are perceiving consciousness and we want to extract, as Husserl believed that we could extract the objective properties by bracketing the natural attitude. Epoche is the term he uses for these philosophical reductions. A couple of brackets. You take the natural attitude, you put brackets around it, and set it aside. The natural attitude is simply what Heidegger will embrace, actually. He sets it aside because we want a theoretical mode. We're not concerned with the living aspect of things, and this is what Heidegger doesn't like. We want to turn the world into an abstract theoretical phase space that Heidegger invents a conceptual term for in Being and Time, Vorhandenheit. That is the metaphysical realm of self-sufficient entities that extends from Plato to Husserl. They're all talking about being as something up there. And for Husserl, the ego is what he calls the transcendental ego, which he simply borrowed from Kant, who called it the transcendental unity of apperception. And it's the ego that exists in an abstract phase space as a pure subject beholding a pure realm of objects. In other words, the Cartesian XYZ phase space that you put an object into, and when you do that, you de-world it. Or as he will say in the lecture here in a moment, what the theoretical attitude of science does, and he's talking about Husserl, is it de-experiences things. It withdraws the environment. It withdraws the worldly context. It denudes the object or person or entity, whatever it is, from its local characteristics, its mythologies, its beliefs, whatever it is, are the things that it is embedded in that creates a world. And we'll take a look at that word. The first concept that Heidegger introduces in his first lecture in 1919 is the concept of worlding, where he takes the word world, Welt, and transforms it into a verb, es weltet, the world worlds. That's his first concept. Because that's the thing with great philosophers. What they do is they create new concepts, new ideas that become like epistemological tools that enable you to see new realities. And that's the job of the philosopher. And Heidegger, I think, creates more concepts across the span of his career than any other philosopher ever in history, I think. I don't even think Aristotle comes close to him. He was he was a poet and a mystic, disguised as an academic philosopher, playing the game by the rules, proper lectures, proper citation, write in a stiff style that doesn't leave much room for the personality to get in there. This isn't Nietzsche, who comes across sometimes hysterically, but also hysterically funny. So Heidegger doesn't have that personality, but does have the personality of a mystic. And you will see that as you go through his works and you get to the great book, The Contributions. It's almost a new concept on every page. And it's a lot closer to poetry than the Contributions to Philosophy of the Events is what it's called. And it's a lot closer to poetry than it is to philosophy. It's beautiful. And Heidegger knew, and he agreed with Husserl on this, that philosophy and poetry are the core, and they both touch the core of the world, the metaphysical essence. The poet is doing philosophy, the great poet. We're talking about not shitty poets. We're talking about Rilke, Trockel. We're talking about Hölderlin, Goethe, the great poets, not the little ego-dropping poets of the 1940s New York confessionalist school. Not that kind of crap. That's not real poetry. Unfortunately, it's bad because the 20th century created a bad name for both poetry and philosophy, because philosophers deconstructed their own work, so you can't take them seriously anymore, so no one does, because they don't take themselves seriously under the conditions of postmodernity. Hypermodernity is producing different thinkers, different altogether. We do now take ourselves seriously as thinkers. It's a different world under the conditions of hypermodernity. The ironic sarcasm is gone. The quest for meaning is back, and it is authentic and very important. Okay, so that's the setup with Husserl and Heidegger, and Heidegger is raised a Catholic. Gradually, Husserl learns to overlook it. Husserl's a Jew, after all. Heidegger has to overlook that aspect of him in order for them. They have to bracket those religious categories, let's say, and set them aside so we can do business. All right, so we've got Husserl and Heidegger. And then Heidegger is sent to the war. He has a bad heart, so he can't fight, but he's sent to the war to gather information on meteorology. And so he's there. And it's interesting because this is the First World War, 1914 to 1918. And some great philosophers came out of that war, not just Heidegger, who was in it, but also Terre de Chardin was in it as an ambulance driver. And the war was absolutely crucial and fundamental for transforming him into a philosopher. Almost all of, and Chardin was a Catholic thinker from Alpha to Omega, all the way to the end, and was extraordinary. Nonetheless, those two books, The Phenomenon of Man and The Divine Milieu, are non-negotiable classics of the history of philosophy. I don't care whether the man was a Catholic. I can bracket that. Doesn't matter. The ideas are incredible in those books. And then so he comes out of the war in 1919 with guns blazing, with a lecture cycle that has been published. It's called, and here I'll show you where it is, because this is where you want to start. Do not touch Being in Time. You might not even want to touch the basic writings. Do this first. Then the basic writings and the Günter Fiegel Heidegger Reader. This is Towards the Definition of Philosophy, as it's published. And here's the Heidegger Reader by Günter Fiegel. Towards the Definition of Philosophy is the first lecture that we have. The first two lectures, actually, that we have from Heidegger. And the first one is called The Idea of Philosophy and the Problem of World View. He's very skeptical in this lecture about world views, especially metaphysical world views. And the second lecture is Phenomenology and Transcendental Philosophy of Value. And these are bombs. They are great. It's not a long book. It's 160 pages or so. And he's much more clear because he hasn't yet developed the huge, dazzling apparatus of semiotic capture, you might say, of all his dazzling concepts that are impossible and at first impenetrable to understand in Being in Time. Most people just throw the book at the wall, as my mentor William Irving Thompson did, to his shame. That's a cop-out. That's a cop-out. Because this is comprehensible. You just got to be patient with it and dig in. So I'm going to read the first, it's only a couple of pages here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But this is all of Heidegger right here. In these 5 pages, this is Heidegger in Nuke. It is the overture to his opera. It's all in here, and it's comprehensible. Let's read it and see. Here, Fiegel has titled it The Environmental Experience. Now, this is very important, this use of this word, environment, Umwelt, which comes from the biologist Jakob von Uexküll, where he's talking about how each organism, each biological creature has its own Umwelt, world round, you might say, its own epistemological stage where its perceptions are relevant to that epistemological theater. So 1919, and here he is. I bring a new experience to givenness, not only for myself. Givenness means es gibt, it gives. The world gives us experiences. We don't just subjectify them like Kant or Schopenhauer. The world comes to us. It's real, it's out there, and it comes to us. To givenness not only for myself, but I ask you all, each isolated I-self who is sitting here, to do the same. In fact, we wish to enter into an experience that is, to a certain degree, unitary. You come into this lecture hall as usual at the usual hour and go to your usual place. Notice that he starts not with philosophy, but with lived, actual experience. He's turned Husserl upside down, and he's unbracketed the natural attitude of lived experience, which for Heidegger is primordial, and it comes before theory, before Vorgang, before theory, before the theoretical attitude. Our lived experiences are always already there, and we're always already immersed in them. In medias res, let's say. So he says, you come into this lecture hall as usual, at the usual hour, and go to your usual place. Focus on this experience of seeing your place. Or you can also put yourselves in my own position. Stepping into the lecture hall, I see the lectern. We dispense with a verbal formulation of this. What do I see? Brown surfaces at right angles to one another? No, I see something else. A large box with another smaller one set upon it? Not at all. I see the lectern at which I am to speak. You see the lectern from which you are to be addressed and from which I have spoken to you before. In pure experience, there is no founding state of affairs, as it is called, as if I first of all see intersecting brown surfaces, which then reveal themselves to me as a box, then as a desk. He's parodying Husserl here, because in a way, with Husserl's different forms of intention, consciousness, perception, he's kind of a philosophical equivalent of cubism. He's kind of taking the object, what I call in my book, Art After Metaphysics, the hyperdimensional object, and slicing it up from different angles and different points of view. So he's parodying that. Then as a desk, then as an academic lecturing desk, a lectern, so that I attach lectern hood to the box like a label. All of that is simply bad and misguided interpretation, i.e. Husserl. Diversion from a pure seeing into the experience. I see the lectern in one fell swoop, as it were, not in isolation, but is adjusted a bit too high for me. I immediately see a book lying upon it, as annoying to me, a book, not a number of layered sheets covered in black marks, as the theoretical attitude would dice it up into. I see the lectern in an orientation, a lighting, a background. Certainly you will say that might be what happens in immediate experience for me, and in a certain way also for you, as you also see this arrangement of wood and boards as a lectern. This object, which all of us here perceive, somehow has the specific meaning lectern. It is already different if we bring a farmer from deep in the Black Forest into the lecture hall. Does he see the lectern, or does he see a box, an arrangement of boards? He sees, quote, the place for the teacher, end quote. He sees the object as fraught with meaning. So even if you come in and you bring in a guy with a totally different perceptual apparatus and walks into the lecture hall, he doesn't see boards and boxes. He sees a something. He might not know what, but it means to him that he doesn't know what it is. Everything means something to the perceiving consciousness. Let's see. He sees the place for the teacher. He sees the object as fraught with meaning. If someone saw a box, then he would not be seeing a piece of wood, a thing, a natural object. But let us imagine a Negro from Senegal suddenly transplanted here from his hut. What he would see, gazing at this object, is difficult to say precisely. Perhaps something to do with magic, or something behind which one could find good protection from arrows and thrown stones. Or what is most likely, would he not know what to make of it at all, just seeing complexes of colors and surfaces? Simply a thing, a something which simply is. Notice that word there, is, the being word. That's the whole point of everything. The fact remains, whoever is interpreting this lectern from, let's say, the black man from Senegal, embedded in what Gebser calls the magical consciousness structure, might see it as some sort of place where a priest or a magician might hold a ceremony or something like that. Whereas in the mental consciousness structure, we know perfectly well that it's a lectern, and we know what lecterns are for. They're for giving lessons and for students to grow with knowledge and so forth. It's not nothing. There is no such thing as a nothing. But later on, he'll write an essay on the nothing, and he'll talk about that. So my seeing and that of a Senegalese Negro are fundamentally different. The Senegalese Negro's perceptual apparatus is a different consciousness structure, different than the mental. All they have in common is that in both cases something is seen, and there is something there. That's the mystery that you cannot escape in Heidegger. There is something. You can't get away from that. For this, my seeing is to a high degree something individual, which I certainly may not, without further ado, use to ground the analysis of the experience. For this analysis is supposed to yield universally valid scientific results in conjunction with the elaboration of the problem. Assuming that the experiences were fundamentally different, that only my experience existed, I still assert that universally valid propositions are possible, but there are different Daseins. Keep that in mind. When we get to discussing a bit, being in time, he presents it as though there is only one human way of being in the world in that book, but elsewhere he fully recognizes that that's only one Dasein. There are many other Daseins as well. So this implies that these sentences would also be valid for the experience of the Senegalese Negro, if he could still produce universally valid propositions, where he's saying that that's still possible despite the relativity of cultural point of view. Let us put this assertion aside and focus once again on the experience of the Senegalese Negro. Even if he saw the lectern simply as a bare something that is there, it would have meaning for him, a moment of signification. There is, however, the possibility of showing that the assumption of the transplanted, unscientific, not cultureless, because he's embedded in the magical consciousness structure, it's just that it's not the mental. that the assumption of the transplanted, unscientific Negro seeing the lectern as simply something is nonsensical but not contradictory, i.e. not impossible in a formal logical sense. The Negro will see the lectern much more as something, quote, which he does not know what to make of, end quote. The meaningful character of, quote, instrumental strangeness, end quote, and the meaningful character of the, quote, lectern, end quote, are in their essence absolutely identical. In the experience of seeing the lectern, something is given to me from out of an immediate environment. And that gift it gives, the world gives, will become more and more important for Heidegger in putting more and more autonomy on the object than on the subject. He's going to shift, he's going to take the transcendental ego and the transcendental object and destroy them, smash them together so that Dasein will mean self plus a world that is always already there, that I have a pre-philosophical understanding of from the start. You never start with the theoretical attitude. You have the lived experience. The theoretical orientation occurs only in certain instances, rare instances in your life, or a lot of instances if you're a philosopher. This environmental milieu, lectern, book, blackboard, notebook, fountain pen, caretaker, student fraternity, streetcar, automobile, etc., does not consist just of things, objects that are then additionally conceived as meaning such and such. Rather, the meaningful is what is primary and is immediately given to me without any mental detours or cross-thing-oriented apprehension. Living in an environment, it signifies to me everywhere and always, it all has the character of world. Quote, it worlds, end quote. Es Weltet. That's his first concept, that's his first idea right there, and in many ways his most important. The transformation of the noun Welt into a verb, that's a new idea. The world worlds. The problem of the connection between the two belongs to the notion of the eidetic genealogy of primary motivations and leads into difficult problem areas. Getting a little bit more into the theoretical attitude there for a second, a temporary slippage. Let us bring to mind again the environmental experience, my seeing of the lectern. In my comportment towards seeing the lectern giving itself environmentally, do I find anything like an, quote, I, end quote, in the pure sense of experience? In this experiencing, in this living toward, there is something of me. My I goes out completely beyond itself and resonates along in this seeing as the self of the Negro resounds in his own experience of, quote, something which he cannot make out, end quote. So you're resonating in the flow of your life. You're just going along with the flow, resonating. Let's bring to mind again the environmental experience, my seeing of the lectern. Let's see. So more precisely, only through this particular I resonating along does it experience something environmental, does it world. Wherever and whenever it worlds for me, I am somehow fully along with it. Let us compare this to the experience of the question. And the footnote says here, Heidegger is referring to the question, is there anything whatsoever? So the response then to is there anything? The anything whatsoever about whose there is, I inquire, does not world. The world-like is extinguished here, that is to say in the scientific attitude, not the natural attitude. The world-like is extinguished here when we grasp every possible environmental thing as anything whatsoever. This grasping, this firmly placing observation, feststellen, of the object as such, occurs at the cost of forcing back my own I. It belongs to the meaning of anything whatsoever that I do not resonate along in its determination, but rather that this resonating, this going out along with, mit herausgehen, is prevented. Science de-worlds, it de-experiences, and it pushes what he calls here the historical I out of the way. The historical I is the Dasein I. And to this extent, I realized rereading this that Heidegger's Dasein is not quite as different from Spengler's Dasein as I thought, because both of them mean life experience, lived vitalistic experience. So they're actually using the same idea, they're just giving it different accents. The object being as such does not touch me. The I that firmly places is not myself anymore, because now I'm a theoretical I. have been dehistoricized. Observation, i.e. scientific, as an experience is only a remnant of lived experience, Erleben. It is a de-living, Entleben. That's the second concept he creates, Entleben, de-living. What is objective, what is known, is as such removed, lifted out of the actual lived experience. The objectified occurrence, the occurrence is something objective and known, we call a process, Vorgang. It simply passes by my knowing I, to which it is related only by being known in a pale self-relatedness reduced to the minimum of experience. It is the essence of things and of their states of affairs to only give themselves precisely in knowledge, i.e. in the theoretical comportment and for the theoretical I. In the theoretical comportment, I am directed towards something, but I do not live as historical I toward this or that world-like thing. Let us once again contrast entire contexts of experience so that it does not appear that the opposition pertains only to isolated experiences. And so here he says, notice the similarity to Spengler. Let us place ourselves into the comportment of the astronomer, who in astrophysics investigates the phenomenon of sunrise simply as a process in nature, relating to it indifferently and letting it proceed along its course, i.e. translated into the causality principle, as Spengler writes in The Decline of the West, the world as nature picture. The world as history, however, is this next sentence, the destiny idea. Let us contrast this with the experience of the chorus of Theban elders who in Sophocles' Antigone look at the rising sun on the first friendly morning after a successful defensive battle. Sun's beam, fairest of all that ever till now shone on seven-gated Thebes. And the German down here, the Holderlin's German translation of it reads, O Blich der Sonne, du schönster der dem siebentthorgen Thebe, seit langem scheint. Seit, there's that being word, seit, is, right there. It comes through in the German, not so well in the English. It shines beautifully, seit langem scheint. With this contrast, however, the problem of the how of the different modes of experience is not solved in any way, but instead first raised to begin with. From here onwards, he's got a footnote there for himself to rework this paragraph. For the time being, however, it will suffice for our purposes as what do we see the experiences. The question of how such seeing is possible, of what it itself is, and whether it is not also theory, it is after all to become science, will be set aside for the moment. So we'll bracket the theoretical attitude that Husserl favors. Let us in turn try to understand both experiences according to their own meaning, which one is irrelevant, and see if in this understanding that turns toward experiences we can regard these as processes, as objects that are presented, vorgestellt, observed, festgestellt, before us. But something does happen. In seeing the lectern, I am fully present with my eye. It resonates with the experience. As we said, it is an experience proper to me, and that is how I see. However, it is not a process, Vorgang, scientific, Vorhandenheit, but rather an event. In my case, it's an Ereignis, meaning, for him, a significant event of meaning. Self in German is Eigen. Non-process, a remainder of event in the experience of questioning. That's his definition of Ereignis. Non-process. Non-scientific, non-Vorgang, a remainder of event in the experience of questioning. Lived experience does not pass in front of me like a thing that I place there as an object. Instead, I myself appropriate, ereigne, it to myself, and it occurs ereignet sich, according to its essence. And if in looking at it I understand it in this way, then I understand it not as a process, as thing or object, but as something completely new, as an event. I see something thing-like just as little as I do an objectified sphere of things, a being, ein Sein, either physical or psychical being. Attending strictly to the experience, I do not see anything cyclical. Appropriating event also does not mean that I appropriate the experience from the outside or from anywhere else. Outer and inner have as little meaning here as physical and psychical. The experiences are events of appropriation insofar as they live out of what is one's own, and life only lives in this way. With this, the character of the event has not yet been fully determined. Wow. That's just the first lecture. Coming out of the starting gate with this guy, guns blazing. That is all very comprehensible. People bitch and whine and moan and complain about how Heidegger is incomprehensible, and I think we just proved that that is not the case. You just need to have the right teacher. And so my school, the class begins tomorrow. Tomorrow, February 1st is Saturday, February, and it'll begin at 2 p.m. MST. So for any of you who want to do last minute signups, go ahead and contact me at my email, which is johndavidebert@gmail.com. All right, I'll see you in class.